I had my rifle aimed right at its head, a baby white wolf, the enemy. But my dog of 12 years, Sadie, Alara's dog, she leaped between my barrel and that wolf, and she growled at me. She chose the enemy over her master. That night, I learned a truth that was even harder to swallow. That cub, it was the offspring of the very beast that killed Bessie, the last living thing my wife had left behind. And God help me, that wasn't even the worst part of this story. In Wyoming, the wind doesn't just blow, it scours. It peels the paint off your barn and the hope right out of your heart if you let it. I've lived on this ranch for 45 years. I've seen winters that could freeze a man's breath solid in the air. But the cold I'm talking about, it isn't the kind the weatherman warns you about. It's the silence. It's been 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days since Alara passed. The silence she left behind is a physical thing. It's a weight in the air. It's the second coffee cup I still pour every morning, just out of habit, and the sight of it sitting cold on the counter hours later. This house, once filled with her humming and the clatter of pans, has become an echo chamber for memories I'm trying to keep and thoughts I'm trying to lose. My only company is Sadie. She's an Australian shepherd, gray around the muzzle, with one blue eye and one brown, just like Alara always liked. Sadie's old. Her hips ache in the cold, and I know mine do too. We're two relics, rattling around a life that's already moved on. Most days, Sadie just lies on the braided rug by the door. She used to live to chase the cattle. Now, she just watches the driveway. I think we're both just waiting. Though for what, I couldn't tell you. The storm started on a Tuesday, creeping over the Bighorn Mountains like a thief. It didn't come on fast. It came on heavy. The sky turned a flat, bruised purple, and the air got so still, you could almost hear the snow before you saw it. By noon, the world was gone, erased by a curtain of white so thick I couldn't see the barn, just 50 yards away. This wasn't just snow. This was a Wyoming blizzard, the kind that digs in its claws and refuses to let go. Sadie still has her routines. Stubborn, just like her owner. 4 o'clock every single day, she walks the fence line. A shepherd's duty, she figures, even if there's nothing to herd but ghosts. Not today, girl, I'd said, holding the door shut. The wind was already sharp enough to cut glass, whining through the keyhole. She just looked up at me, not barking, just staring with that patient, dutiful gaze. A duty is a duty. I sighed and let her out. I watched her blue merle coat disappear into the swirling white before I'd even fully closed the door. 4 o'clock. At 4:30, I put another log on the fire. The house groaned as the wind slammed against the northern wall. At 5 August, I went to the door. I opened it, and the wind stole the heat from the room, plastering my shirt to my chest. "Sadie," I yelled. My voice didn't just vanish. The storm swallowed it whole like it had never been. I sat in my armchair, the one with the springs that groan, the one Alara always hated. I listened. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked, the fire cracked, the wind howled, scraping icy fingers against the window panes. But there was no scratching at the door, no jingle of her collar. I sat there for an hour, or maybe it was 3. Time dissolves in a whiteout. I bundled up, grabbed the big lantern, and stepped outside. It was like stepping onto another planet. The snow was knee-deep and drifting. "Sadie," I roared again, pushing my voice against the wind. "Sadie." Nothing. Just the shriek of the storm. I stumbled back inside, my chest tight. The cold wasn't just in my bones anymore. It was inside, sitting in the chair across from me. Alara was gone. And now, the last living thing that shared her memory, the last warmth in this empty house, was gone too. I sat by the cold window, watching the useless yellow beam of the porch light get smothered by the dark. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt truly, completely alone. The night was the longest of my life. I didn't bother with the fire. The cold inside me was a different kind, one that wood smoke couldn't touch. I sat in the armchair, the lantern guttering on the table, and just watched the black square of the window. Every hour, the clock on the mantelpiece chimed, mocking me with the passage of time. I thought about Sadie out there in the white. I thought about her paws, her old hips. I pictured her curling up under a snowdrift, giving in to the cold, just like I had given in to the silence. When dawn finally came, it wasn't a sunrise. It was just a slow, reluctant graying of the world. The wind had died, leaving behind that deafening after-storm quiet, where the only sound is the drip of snow melting from the eaves. My back ached. I felt 100 years old. I stood up, joints cracking, and forced myself to the kitchen window to start the ritual of the coffee I didn't want. That's when I saw it. Far out near the southern fence line, a smudge of color, a dark shape moving against the impossible white. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was too far to be sure. I fumbled for the binoculars Alara always kept on the sill for bird watching. I raised them, my hands shaking so badly it took a moment to find the focus. It was her. It was Sadie. She was alive. She wasn't running. She was barely walking. It was a painful, staggering plow through snow that was waist-deep on her. Every few steps, she'd collapse, her head vanishing, then push herself back up, driven by something I couldn't see. She wasn't coming straight for the house. She was heading for the old barn, the one we hadn't used in years. I didn't even grab my coat. I just threw the door open and plunged off the porch into the drifts, yelling her name. The snow was a physical weight, fighting me with every step. "Sadie, I'm coming, girl. Hold on." She heard me. She turned her head, but she didn't bark. She just waited, her body heaving, steam rising from her coat in the freezing air. When I finally reached her, I almost fell over her. "Sadie," I panted, dropping to my knees. "You old fool, you crazy old fool." Her fur was matted with ice balls, and she was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. I wrapped my arms around her, but she immediately pulled away from me. She staggered back a few feet and nudged something with her nose. It was just a lump. Another drift of snow, I thought. But it was stained, a faint, dirty yellow. "What is it, girl?" I muttered, crawling closer. "What did you find?" I brushed the snow away. Underneath was fur, small, white, and frozen stiff. A rabbit, maybe. A coyote pup. Then I saw the shape of the head, the tiny, laid-back ears. It was a wolf, a cub, white as the snow that had tried to bury it. A coldness that had nothing to do with the weather washed over me. I'm a rancher. I have been my whole life. You don't find a wolf. A wolf is not a lost pet. A wolf is a killer. It's the shadow that takes the weakest calf, the thing that costs you $1,000 in the dead of night. It's the enemy. I looked at Sadie, and a hard, bitter anger rose in my throat. "This?" I said, my voice quiet. "You stayed out in that storm for this?" She just whined, a low, desperate sound, and nudged the cub again. It didn't move. It was lifeless. "No," I said. I stood up. "This is where it ends. We don't save them. We don't bring them home." I turned and walked back to the house. My steps were steady now. I didn't feel the cold. I felt the old, familiar burn of the rancher. I walked into the mudroom, took my .30-30 rifle from the rack, and grabbed a single cartridge from the box on the shelf. I loaded it. The click-clack of the lever action was sharp and final in the quiet house. I walked back out. Sadie was still there, standing over the cub. She watched me approach, her one blue eye and one brown eye fixed on the rifle in my hands. "Move, Sadie," I said, my voice flat. She didn't move. I said, "Move. Get away from it." I raised the rifle to my shoulder, settling the stock against my cheek. I looked down the iron sights at the small white patch of fur. An easy shot, a necessary one. And then Sadie did something she had never done in her 12 years of life. She growled. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a bark. It was a low, guttural rumble that came from deep in her chest, a sound I had never heard, a sound that didn't belong to her. She stepped deliberately over the cub, placing her exhausted body between it and my gun. Her hackles rose, and she bared her teeth. I froze, my finger on the trigger. This was my dog, my loyal, gentle Sadie, who would roll over for a belly rub from a stranger. My dog, who had never shown an ounce of aggression to anything but a stubborn steer. She was threatening me. I lowered the rifle, stunned. I looked past the gun, past the threat, and into her eyes. The sadness was gone. The waiting was gone. Her eyes were sharp, bright, and filled with a fire I hadn't seen since Alara was alive. It was a fierce, protective, purposeful blaze. She had made a choice. I stood there for a long time, the rifle heavy in my hands, the snow melting on the hot barrel. The world was silent again, but this was a new silence. It was the silence of a decision being made. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what it meant. But I knew that look. I was staring at my old, tired dog, and she was telling me, clear as day, that she finally had something to live for. I stood there, the rifle cooling in my grip, locked in that silent standoff with my own dog. The wind had stopped, and the world was just three shades: the white of the snow, the gray of the sky, and the dark, stubborn loyalty in Sadie's eyes. Finally, I broke. I lowered the rifle all the way, clicking the safety back on. I sighed, a plume of hot air dissolving in the cold. "Fine," I growled, not to her, but to the situation. "Fine, you win." I didn't do it for the wolf. I did it for her. Because the fire in her eyes was the first real warmth I'd felt in this godforsaken cold. And I couldn't bring myself to put it out. I unloaded the rifle and trudged back, laying the gun in the mudroom. I grabbed an old horse blanket from a hook, the one that still smelled faintly of hay and Alara's saddle soap. When I got back, Sadie was still standing guard, trembling from cold, but not moving an inch. I knelt, pushing her aside gently. "All right, Mother," I muttered. I touched the cub. It was rock solid. Frozen, I was sure it was dead. But as I slipped the rough blanket underneath it, I thought I saw a microscopic twitch in its eyelid. Or maybe I just imagined it. I scooped it up. It weighed nothing, just a handful of frozen fur. Sadie pressed against my leg, whining as I carried the bundle toward the old barn. I couldn't bring it in the house. I just couldn't. The barn was cold, but it was out of the wind. I kicked open the stubborn door to the tack room, a place I hadn't been in since I'd sold Alara's horse. The air was heavy with the smell of old leather and dust. I cleared a space on the workbench, sweeping aside old invoices and a broken bridle. I laid the little creature down. "Now what?" I said to Sadie, who had followed me in. She jumped up, putting her front paws on the bench, and immediately began to lick the cub. Not a gentle lick, but a hard, rasping, frantic one, as if she was trying to scrub the cold off it, to lick it back to life. She coiled her body around the frozen shape. sharing the last of her warmth. I watched her for a moment. Then, feeling like a fool, I went back to the house, filled a hot water bottle, and grabbed an old towel. I came back, wedged the bottle against the cub's belly, and rubbed it roughly with the towel. We worked, the dog and I, in a strange, silent partnership. I was rubbing the ice from its tiny paws when I heard the sound that always breaks the post-storm silence. The rumble of a diesel engine. My gut tightened. In a whiteout, you don't get visitors. You only get emergencies. I looked out the tack room's dirty window. A big, rusted-out Ford F-250 was churning its way up my unplowed drive. Marcus Thorne. If I am the silence, Marcus is the noise. He's my only neighbor to the north. A hard man who ran his ranch with an iron fist and a short temper. He saw the world in black and white, assets and threats. And he saw wolves as the blackest threat of all. I pulled the barn door shut, leaving Sadie with the cub. "Stay," I ordered, a useless command. I met him on the porch. "Arthur?" he grunted, climbing the steps. He was a big man, wrapped in canvas and fur, his face raw from the wind. Hell of a blow, wasn't it? "It was," I said. "Coffee's on." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Alara and I had eaten thousands of meals. Marcus dwarfed the small wooden chair. He wrapped his thick, grease-stained fingers around the mug I gave him. "You lose any?" he asked. "Haven't checked yet," I said. "Sadie was out in it all night. Just got her back." Marcus snorted. "Lucky I wasn't. Lost a calf. And that ain't the worst of it." He took a long, noisy slurp of coffee. "They got Bessie." The name hit me like a physical blow. Bessie, Alara's old 4-H heifer. A gentle, lop-eared Hereford that Alara had raised from a calf, bottle-fed her, even named her. When Alara died, I couldn't stand to look at the cow. Its placid brown eyes reminded me too much of hers. I'd sold her to Marcus just to get her off the property. "Bessie?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Yep," Marcus said, oblivious. "Wolves. Damn pack got brave in the storm. Ripped her throat out not 100 yards from my barn. I caught him in the act." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "But I got the bitch, the big one, a black matriarch. Dropped her right over Bessie's body." I just stared into my coffee mug. The room felt suddenly too hot. "Thing is," Marcus went on, "she had a litter. I found the den this morning, not a mile from here. Most of them scattered or froze, but I saw one, a freak, pure white, running up the ridge." My blood went cold. I could feel my heart beating a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. "A white one," I repeated, trying to keep my voice flat. "Yep, and I'm gonna get it. Can't have that line continuing. A wolf that bold, killing a full-grown cow in a man's yard. That's bad blood." He drained his mug and stood up, the chair scraping loudly on the floor. "Anyway," he said, pulling his gloves back on, "I'm heading out with a rifle. You see anything? You know, a white flash up on the hills? You give me a call." He clapped me on the shoulder, a heavy, painful gesture. "We gotta wipe him out, Arthur." "For good," nodded. I couldn't find my voice. I just nodded. I watched from the window as his truck spun its wheels, found traction, and disappeared down the drive. The house fell back into silence. But it wasn't the silence of grief anymore. It was the silence of a lie. I looked at my hands, resting on the kitchen table. Then I looked out toward the barn, where my dog was curled around a tiny, living secret. Sadie hadn't just saved a wolf. She had saved the cub of the very wolf that had just destroyed the last living memory of my wife. And I, God help me, I had just lied to protect it. I stood in the kitchen until the sound of Marcus's truck was completely gone, swallowed by the snow. The only sound left was the ticking clock and the echo of his words. Bessie. Wiped him out. Bad blood. A wave of something hot and bitter rose in my throat. I felt a sudden, sharp anger, not at Marcus, but at the little thing in my barn. It was a curse. It had brought Sadie home, half dead, and now it had made me a liar, all in the shadow of my wife's memory. I walked back to the barn, my boots heavy. I was going to end this. I didn't need the rifle. A thing that small, that cold, it would be a mercy. I pulled the tack room door open. The smell of dust and old leather was mixed with something else now, something animal and sharp. Sadie didn't look up. She was completely coiled around the white cub, her whole body shuddering. Not from the cold. She was panting, a low, rapid huffing. And the cub, it was moving. It was no longer frozen stiff. It was pliable, damp. Its tiny, blind head was pushing weakly against Sadie's belly, rooting by instinct. A faint, high-pitched, mewling sound came from it, thin as a thread. My God, I whispered. She had licked it back to life. Her warmth, her stubborn, relentless warmth, had beaten the blizzard. I watched, my anger dissolving, replaced by a stunned confusion. The cub nosed along Sadie's fur, searching, crying, and Sadie looked up at me. Her eyes were frantic. The fire I'd seen earlier was still there, but now it was mixed with desperation. She licked the cub's face, then her own empty underside, then looked at me again. She was asking me for something I couldn't give, and she was asking for something she couldn't give. I don't know what to do, girl, I said, my voice sounding strange in the small room. The cub's cries grew weaker, more desperate. It was starving. I ran back to the house, my rancher's mind clicking into a different gear, a gear I hadn't used in years. Weak calf, needs colostrum, needs milk. I fumbled through the cabinets, past my own tins of soup and beans. I found Alara's old baking supplies, an eyedropper she'd used for cake decorating. In the pantry, a can of evaporated milk, ancient, but sealed. I mixed it with a little warm water and sugar, a poor substitute, but it was all I had. Back in the barn, I pushed Sadie's head aside. Let me try, I said. I squeezed a drop onto the cub's pink mouth. It didn't respond. I pried its tiny jaws open, jaws that would one day be able to snap a deer's leg, and squeezed a few drops in. It coughed, sputtered, then, miraculously, it swallowed. For 2 days, that was our life. A strange, exhausting ballet. Every hour, I'd go to the barn, my joints screaming to warm the milk mixture. I'd feed the cub, drop by drop, and every hour, Sadie licked it clean, nuzzled it, and never once left its side. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't drink. She just lay there, pouring her life into this little white spark. On the 3rd morning, I found him limp again. The milk wasn't enough. His body was cold, his breathing shallow. He had stopped crying. Sadie was frantic. She was pawing at him, whimpering, looking at me with a betrayal in her eyes that cut me to the quick. I had failed her. Damn it, I swore, scooping the cub into the horse blanket. Damn it all. I carried it to my truck. Sadie tried to follow, but she was too weak. She stumbled on the porch step. I lifted her, my God, she was just skin and bones, and put her on the passenger seat. Then I placed the dying cub in her lap. The drive to town was a blur. The roads were still slick. Sadie never took her eyes off the cub, licking its face, her hot breath fogging the windshield. Dr. Chloe's vet clinic smelled of bleach and panic. Chloe was a good vet, young, practical, no nonsense. She'd patched up my cattle and my dogs for years. Arthur, she said, surprised when I burst in. What on earth? She stopped when she saw the white cub in my hands. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed. Arthur, what did you do? I didn't do anything. Sadie found it. It's the one from the storm. She took it from me without a word, laying it on the steel table. It's half dead. Starvation, hypothermia. Where's the mother? Dead, I said, my voice curt. Marcus Thorne shot her. Chloe's face tightened. She knew Marcus. She went to work, her hands moving fast, inserting a tiny needle under the cub's skin for fluids, wrapping it in a heating blanket. Sadie had her chin on the table, watching every move, her body trembling. He needs real milk, Arthur. A formula. This thing won't survive on canned milk. Chloe turned, then paused. But this cub is rooting against Sadie. She's licked her own belly raw. She thinks it's hers, I said quietly. Chloe looked at Sadie, a deep, analytical look. She felt Sadie's stomach, checked her gums. She's dehydrated, Arthur. Dangerously so. She's been pouring everything into this. And she's got nothing to give. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Look, it's a noble instinct. But she's an old spayed female. There's no... She stopped. Her hand was on Sadie's belly, near her teats. A strange look, one of disbelief, crossed her face. No, she whispered. That's impossible. What? I said, stepping closer. Arthur, she's lactating. I stared at her. She's what? She's old, Chloe. She's never had pups. I know, Chloe said, her voice awed. It's a pseudo-pregnancy. A false pregnancy. I've seen it, but never like this. Her body, her emotions, must be so convinced that this is her pup that her hormones have actually triggered milk production. She looked at me, her eyes wide. It's a 1 in a million shot. A miracle. A word I hadn't used in years. Miracle. I looked at Sadie. She was licking the cub, which was now warm and stirring. And as it nuzzled her, a tiny drop of white fluid, real milk, appeared on her fur. Alara, I whispered. So low I wasn't sure I'd said it. She's helping. Chloe was busy pulling supplies from a cabinet. It's a miracle, Arthur, she said again, but her voice was different now. It was grim. And it's killing her. I turned. What are you talking about? She's an old dog, Chloe said, turning to face me, her arms crossed. Her body isn't designed for this. It's pulling calcium from her bones, nutrients from her organs. She's starving herself to feed this thing. This miracle is burning her up from the inside out. She put a hand on my arm. Her gaze was unflinching. I'll give you supplements for them both. But you need to understand. You've got a choice. You're a rancher. You know the hard math. You can save this wolf cub, but you will lose your dog doing it. It's just a matter of time. I drove home from Chloe's clinic with a bag full of high-nutrient paste for Sadie and a gut full of dread. The hard math, she'd called it. It's the kind of math a rancher lives with. You save the calf. You sometimes lose the mother. You protect the herd. You shoot the predator. I just never thought I'd be on this side of the equation, where the predator was the calf, and the mother was my own dog. The days that followed blurred into a strange, heavy rhythm. Life revolved around the tack room. I insulated the walls, fixed the old electric heater, and moved Sadie in permanently. I couldn't risk Blizzard. I had to call him something, and the storm that brought him seemed fitting. I couldn't risk him near the house. Every 3 hours, around the clock, my old alarm would go off. I'd limp out to the barn, my joints screaming in the cold. I'd mix the high-nutrient paste with warm water and force Sadie to drink it, just trying to keep her ahead of the deficit. And she, in turn, would let the cub nurse. She was a ghost of herself. Her beautiful merle coat, once thick and glossy, was now dull and thin. Her hips grew sharp under my hands. The fire I'd seen in her eyes at the fence line was gone, replaced by a tired, flickering ember of duty. She was fading. Blizzard, though, he thrived. He was a creature of pure, raw, unapologetic need. He grew faster than any pup I'd ever seen. His eyes opened, not the soft, milky blue of a puppy, but a sharp, piercing, almost translucent yellow. They were eyes that didn't just look at you. They looked through you. His baby fur molted, replaced by a coat that was thick and coarse. He wasn't just nursing anymore. His teeth came in, sharp as needles. He'd chew on the old leather bridles hanging on the wall, tearing at them with a casual strength that chilled me. He'd play, but his play was different. It wasn't the clumsy tumble of a dog. It was stalking. It was pouncing. It was practicing the kill. The only one who seemed to understand the danger, the one who saw it clearer than I did, was Whiskers. Whiskers was Alara's cat, a short-tempered 20-pound marmalade tomcat, stubborn as a mule and twice as mean. He'd been with us for 17 years. Since Alara died, Whiskers had moved from her lap to her empty pillow. He was the last living thing that still slept in her spot, a furry, purring monument to her memory. He hated the barn. He hated the cold. But most of all, he hated the smell coming from the tack room. He'd sit on the back porch, a safe distance away, his tail twitching like a bullwhip, staring at the barn door. He'd let out a low graveyard hiss at a threat he understood better than I did. It happened on a Tuesday. The snow had started a slow, grudging melt, leaving the ground a muddy soup. The main pump for the cattle trough had frozen and burst. I'd been out all afternoon, cussing and welding, my hands numb, my mood as foul as the weather. I was tired. I was cold. I smelled like grease and frustration. I kicked the mud off my boots and pushed open the kitchen door, expecting the usual silence. I got it. But it was the wrong kind. Whiskers always met me at the door, winding around my legs, demanding his dinner with an impatient yowl. "Whiskers," I called out. Nothing. The house was dead quiet. I walked into the kitchen. The door to the mudroom, the one I knew I'd latched, was open, just a crack. Blizzard must have gotten stronger, curious. I felt a cold prickle on my neck. "Whiskers?" I called again, louder. I walked into the living room. Sadie was there, lying on the threshold. She'd gotten out, must have been too weak to follow. She whined when she saw me, a low, nervous sound, and thumped her tail once, weakly. Then I saw him. Blizzard. He was in the house. He was standing in the middle of the living room, right on Alara's favorite braided rug. He was standing over something. It was Whiskers. He wasn't sleeping. His neck was twisted at an angle that necks should not be. His orange fur was matted and dark. Blizzard looked up at me, his yellow eyes bright, his muzzle dotted with blood. He wasn't scared. He wasn't guilty. He tilted his head, curious. Something inside me didn't just break. It detonated. It wasn't thought. It was just white, blinding rage. The cold silence of the house was finally broken, filled by the sound of my own roar. "You!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "You thing!" I stumbled back to the porch, past Sadie, and grabbed the first thing I saw. The steel snow shovel. It was heavy in my hands, balanced, cold. I walked back in, raising it. "You don't belong here," I screamed. Blizzard saw me coming. He crouched, and a sound came out of him that I had never heard before, a low, rattling hiss that vibrated in the air. He was wild. He was wrong. I raised the shovel high, ready to bring it down, to end this, to end the lie, to end the curse. I didn't care about Marcus. I didn't care about the miracle. I cared about the dead cat on my wife's rug. I swung. I never hit him. Sadie, who I thought was too weak to even stand, had lunged. She threw her frail, wasted body between me and the wolf. The flat of the steel shovel caught her high on the ribs. The sound was a dull, wet thump. It wasn't the sound a shovel should make. She yelped, a sharp, piercing cry of pain and pure surprise, and collapsed onto the floor, silent. The shovel fell from my hands. It clanged loudly on the hardwood floor. The rage vanished, replaced by a horrifying, icy calm. Blizzard darted back, disappearing into the kitchen. I just stared at Sadie. She lay on her side, panting, shallow breaths, her eyes screwed shut in pain. I reached down, my hand shaking so hard I could barely control it. Sadie? Oh God, Sadie. What did I do? She whined, trying to lift her head, and licked my hand. Even now, after I had struck her, she licked my hand. I looked at the dead cat. I looked at the spot where the wolf had been. And I looked at my dog, the best dog I ever knew, broken on the floor by my own hand. The hard math was over. I had lost everything. The house wasn't just silent anymore. It was broken. After that night, the barn fell silent. Blizzard never howled again. He didn't have to. He knew they were out there. And I knew it too. The cage I had built suddenly felt flimsy, and Marcus Thorne's threat was no longer a distant possibility. It was an inevitability. Those howls would have carried for miles, and Marcus wasn't a man to ignore something like that. I was out of time. The hard math had returned, but the equation had changed. It was no longer about saving Sadie or the wolf. It was about saving Sadie from the wolf, and both of them from Marcus. There was a wildlife sanctuary up north, near the Wind River Range. Chloe had told me about it. It's a last resort, Arthur, she'd said. A place for animals that can't be released but can't be tamed. It was a place for mistakes. It was a place for Blizzard. The next morning, I backed my truck up to the barn. The air was cold, with the sharp metallic smell of more snow on the way. I didn't get a leash. I got a heavy cattle chain and my thickest pair of welding gloves. Sadie watched me from the porch, her head low, her body tense. She knew. When I opened the tack room door, Blizzard was waiting. He was crouched, his yellow eyes burning with a low, cold fire. He was no longer my responsibility. He was cargo. Let's go, I said, my voice flat. He hissed when I approached, but he was cornered, and he knew it. I was quick. I snagged the chain around his neck, took a double wrap, and pulled. He fought, thrashing and snapping, a blur of white fur and teeth. He was terrifyingly strong. He tore one of my gloves, and I felt the needle-sharp pain as his teeth grazed my knuckle. But I had the leverage. I half-dragged, half-wrestled him out of the barn and into the steel cage I'd bolted to the bed of my truck. I slammed the latch and padlocked it. His face was inches from mine through the wire. He wasn't snarling now. He was just watching me, his gaze cold and calculating. When I turned, Sadie was standing by the passenger door. She hadn't made a sound. She was just waiting. "No," I said, my voice harsh. "Not this time, girl. You stay. This isn't for you." She just stared at me, that same stubborn look from the day of the storm. She wasn't asking for permission. She was coming. I sighed, the anger leaving me, replaced by a deep weariness. "Fine," I said, opening the door. "Let's get this over with." She hopped in, settling on the old passenger seat. She didn't look at the cage in the back. She just stared straight ahead, as if she were accompanying me on any other drive to the feed store. We drove for an hour in silence. The pavement gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way to a winding, rutted logging road that climbed up toward the mountains. The sky was low and gray, and a few lazy snowflakes had begun to drift down. This was high country. Lonely country. I was rounding a sharp, icy switchback on what the locals called Dead Man's Pass when I saw it. Marcus Thorne's F-250 was parked sideways, completely blocking the narrow road. My heart seized. I slammed the brakes, and the truck skidded on the ice, stopping just 10 yards from his bumper. Marcus was leaning against his grill, smoking a cigarette, a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He wasn't surprised. He had been waiting for me. Sadie let out a low, soft whine. "Stay in the truck," I said. I pulled my own rifle from the rack behind my head, more out of habit than any real plan, and stepped out into the cold air. "Morning, Arthur," Marcus called out. His voice was casual, friendly even. It was the friendliest he'd been since Bessie died. "Figured you might be headed this way. Heard your pest problem. Got a little loud the other night." "He's not a pest, Marcus. I'm taking him to the sanctuary." Marcus laughed, a short, barking sound. "Sanctuary? That's what you're calling it?" He pushed himself off the truck and walked toward me, the rifle held loose at his side. "I call it taking out the trash. You should have let me do it 3 months ago. Would have saved you a cat." I stiffened. "You've been watching me." "I've been watching it," he corrected. "Ever since I heard it. And I'm not going to let you take that thing anywhere. It's bad blood, Arthur. It's the one that killed Bessie. It's got no place in this world." He raised his rifle, not at me, but at the cage in the back of my truck. Blizzard was silent, a white shape pressed against the back of the wire. "Step aside, Arthur," Marcus said, his voice flat. "This ends now." I raised my own rifle, my hands shaking. "Don't, Marcus. He's in a cage. It's over." "It's not over," he snarled, "till it's dead." He took a step. I took a step. The wind whipped between us, and the only sound was the click of his rifle's safety coming off. And then another sound. A new one. From the high rocks above the road, a low growl. We both froze. Marcus's head snapped up. I looked up past him. On the ridge not 50 yards away, they stood. A pack of them. 6, maybe 7, gray and black, standing like silent statues in the falling snow. Their leader, a massive black male that looked more like a prehistoric bear than a wolf, was staring down at us. It was the pack Blizzard had called. "Well, hell," Marcus whispered, his animosity for me instantly forgotten, replaced by a rancher's primal fear. He slowly swung his rifle away from my truck and toward the ridge. The wolves didn't move. They just watched. The standoff was absolute. Me, Marcus, and the pack, all locked in a triangle of hate and fear. It was Sadie who broke it. I heard the clack of the passenger door pushing open. "Sadie, no, stay!" I yelled. She leaped from the cab and landed softly in the snow. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at Marcus. She was looking at the pack. "Sadie, get back here," I shouted. She ignored me. She walked, her head low, her gait still stiff from my shovel, right past Marcus. He was so stunned, he just watched her go. She walked to the back of my truck, to the cage. Blizzard was on his feet, his eyes locked on the wolves on the ridge. Sadie stood on her hind legs, her paws on the latch. She whined, a short, sharp sound, at Him. He looked at her, and she did it. She, who had been rejected, who had been snarled at. She grabbed the loop of the padlock, the cheap one I'd put on it, and pulled. It was a flimsy lock. She yanked her head back, hard, her old body straining. The steel loop snapped in the freezing cold. The cage door swung open. A dead silence fell on the pass. Marcus was frozen. The wolves on the ridge were motionless. Blizzard stepped out of the cage, onto the bed of the truck. He was free. He looked at Sadie. She just sat in the snow, looking up at him. He turned his head and looked at the black wolf on the ridge. The black wolf let out a single, low huff. It wasn't a call. It was an acknowledgement. Blizzard looked back at me, his yellow eyes holding mine for one long, unreadable second. Then he looked at Sadie. She barked, just once. A sharp, commanding bark. Go. He leapt from the truck, landed silently in the snow, and in 3 bounds, he was across the road. He scrambled up the rocks, his white coat a stark flash against the gray granite. He reached the top, joined the pack, and didn't look back. In a second, they were all gone. Vanished. The pass was empty again. I stood there, my rifle hanging uselessly in my hand. Marcus hadn't moved. He was staring at the empty ridge, his rifle pointed at the ground. He slowly turned his head, not looking at me, but at Sadie. She had walked over and was now sitting patiently by my leg. My God, Arthur, Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse. That dog of yours. He shook his head, then seemed to realize where he was. He looked at me, his face a mask of confusion and disbelief. You're both crazy. He said nothing else. He turned, walked back to his truck, and got in. He backed up, turned around with a spray of gravel and ice, and drove back down the mountain. I was alone. Just me and my dog and the falling snow. I lowered my rifle, my arms shaking, and the cold, for the first time, felt truly, horribly absolute. The snow fell harder, as if the sky was trying to erase the whole event, to cover the tracks of wolves and trucks and the impossible choice that had just been made. For a long time, I just stood there by the side of my truck, the engine ticking in the cold. The pass was silent again, but it was a different silence than the one in my house. This was the ancient, heavy silence of the mountains, a silence that had seen it all and didn't care. Sadie whined, a soft, tired sound. She nudged my hand with her cold nose, pulling me back from wherever my mind had gone. Yeah, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Yeah, girl. Let's go home. I opened her door, and she climbed back onto the passenger seat, her movements slow, her old bones aching. She didn't settle, though. She stood on the seat, her paws on the dashboard, staring out the front window as I walked around. She was watching the ridge, the place where he had disappeared. I got in, the smell of wet dog and my own cold sweat filling the cab. I put the rifle back in its rack. It felt useless. Everything felt useless. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life, too loud in the quiet. I put the truck in gear and eased it past the spot where Marcus's truck had been. The drive down was the longest drive of my life. I kept my eyes on the winding, icy road, but my mind was replaying the last 5 minutes. The look on Marcus's face, the way the black wolf had simply acknowledged Blizzard, the snap of the cheap padlock. I'd had that lock on the unwanted key ring in my kitchen drawer for 20 years. A flimsy, useless thing I'd used for a school locker ages ago. It seemed, in that moment, that fate, or Elara, or whatever you want to call it, had made sure the right lock was on that cage. I glanced at Sadie. She had finally laid down, but she wasn't sleeping. She had curled into a tight ball, her head on the seat, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I remembered the drive to the vet, what felt like a lifetime ago. The cab had been filled with a desperate, frantic energy. Sadie, weak as she was, had been pouring her life into the dying cub in her lap, licking it, warming it, willing it to live. Now, her lap was empty. The cab was just as empty. The chaos, the hourly feedings, the fear, the anger, the miracle. It was all gone. It had been sucked out of the truck and had vanished over the ridge, leaving a vacuum. I was right back where I'd started, a lonely man in a silent truck. No, it was worse. Before, I was just waiting. Now, I knew what I had lost. The empty cattle cage in the back rattled and clanged with every rut in the road, the broken latch striking the metal bars. It was an obnoxious, hollow sound, an exclamation point at the end of the story. It's gone. It's gone. It's gone. I reached over, my hand rough and chapped from the cold. I laid it on Sadie's back. I just rested it there. She flinched just for a second. The memory of the shovel was still there between us. My heart ached. "I'm sorry, girl," I whispered. She seemed to understand. She pushed her old back up into my palm just once, a silent gesture of forgiveness. "I know. It's okay." We stayed like that for a long time, my hand on her. The truck winding its way down out of the snow line, back toward the brown, muddy plains. We were two co-conspirators. We had shared this insane, impossible secret. We had seen a miracle, and we had seen it rejected. We had stood against Marcus, and we had stood against a pack of wolves. And now, we were just tired. When I finally pulled up to the house, the sun was a weak, watery smear in the west. The house looked dark, cold. The porch light wasn't on. The chimney was smokeless. I turned off the engine, and the silence of the house rushed in to fill the cab. "Well," I said to Sadie, "we're home." She didn't move. She just let out a long, slow sigh, the kind of breath that comes from the bottom of your soul. I sat there for another minute, my hand still on her back, listening to the clang, clang of the broken lock as the wind rocked the truck. And I tried to remember what my life had been like before that white shadow had appeared in the snow. I couldn't. The empty cage in the back of the truck was a metaphor for the weeks that followed. Life, which had been so full of a strange, terrible purpose, now felt hollowed out. I unbolted the cage from the truck bed. I folded the horse blanket from the barn. I swept out the tack room, the faint smell of wild animal already fading, replaced by the familiar, cold scent of dust and old leather. I was erasing the evidence of a miracle, or maybe a crime. I wasn't sure which. Life settled back into its old, silent rhythm. But the silence was heavier now. It was filled with the ghosts of what had happened. The ghost of a white cub, the ghost of a marmalade cat, and the ghost of the trust I had broken with my own hands. Sadie was not the same. She had survived, but the cost, as Chloe had warned, was enormous. The fire was gone. She had poured all her remaining life into that cub, and when he had snarled at her, when she had been forced to choose, it had taken the last of her. She stopped eating much. She'd nuzzle the food I put down, take a few obligatory bites to please me, and then retreat to the braided rug by the door. Not the same rug Whiskers had died on. I'd had to burn that one. I'd brought in the old one from the porch. She'd lie there for hours, her chin on her paws, not sleeping, just watching. She was no longer watching the driveway for me, or the fence line for threats. She was just watching. The winter, which had started with that first blizzard, returned with a vengeance. It was as if the mountains, having been disturbed, were now determined to scrub the world clean. The temperature dropped to 20 below and stayed there. The snow piled up, burying the fences, drifting as high as the porch roof. The world shrank to the four walls of my house. The cold seeped in, not just through the windows, but through the floors, through the very foundation. I kept the fire stoked, but it was a losing battle. The house was never warm. It was just less cold. And then I got sick. It started, as it always does, with a scratch in the throat. A cough. I ignored it. I was a rancher. You don't get sick days. I bundled up and went out to chop more wood, to check the cattle, to break the ice in their trough. The cold, wet wind cut through my coat, and by the time I came back, the cough had settled deep in my chest. That night, I woke up, drenched in sweat but shivering. My lungs felt like they were full of wet, broken glass. It was pneumonia. I'd had it once before, 10 years ago, and Alara had nursed me through it with hot broth and sharp words. Now, there was just the silence. And Sadie, who lifted her head from her bed with a soft whine, her brown and blue eyes worried. For 3 days, I was delirious. I was trapped in a gray fog, halfway between the living and the dead. I'd wake, choke down some water, and fall back into a fever dream. I dreamed of Alara, of Bessie, of a white wolf running through snow. On the 4th day, the fever broke, but it left me as weak as a newborn. I was hollowed out, and the woodpile by the stove was empty. I knew this in a dim, distant way. I knew I needed to get up. I needed to go to the porch just 10 feet and bring in more wood. But the thought of moving, of facing the biting cold, was too much. The floor was an ocean, and I was stranded. The fire in the wood stove, the one thing holding the brutal Wyoming winter at bay, began to die. I watched it happen. I watched the orange glow fade to red, the red embers to gray ash. The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my own breath. I pulled Alara's quilt around me, but it was useless. The cold had found me. "Sadie," I whispered. My voice was a dry croak. "Sadie." She was on her bed, the one by the stove, curled in the tightest ball I'd ever seen. She whimpered, trying to stand, but her old legs wouldn't obey. She was too old, too weak, too cold. She just shivered, her eyes fixed on me. "It's okay, girl," I whispered. "It's okay." I lay back on the couch. This was it then. This was the end. A stupid, clumsy end, freezing to death in my own home because I was too weak to get a log of wood. I thought of Alara. I thought, "I'm coming, honey." It didn't even feel sad. It just felt finished. The silence I had been living in was finally making itself permanent. I closed my eyes. The cold was heavy like a blanket, pressing the last of the air from my lungs. The house was dead. The silence was complete. And then, a sound, a loud, heavy thud from the porch. Not a scratch, not a howl, a solid, human thud, like a heavy boot kicking the snow off. I opened my eyes. My heart gave a single, painful kick. Sadie's head was up. Her ears, for the first time in weeks, were pricked forward. Her body was rigid. Then, a new sound, a loud, insistent scratching at the door. Not a dog's scratch, not an animal's. It was the sound of a glove or a hand scraping against the wood. Someone was outside. Sadie's head was up. A low growl rumbled in her chest, not of threat, but of deep, confused alarm. The scratching at the door came again, more insistent, scraping hard against the frozen wood. "Who's there?" I tried to call out, but my voice was just a dry rattle. My heart was a cold, hard knot in my chest. It wasn't the pack. They wouldn't scratch. They would tear. It wasn't Marcus. He would have knocked or just walked in. I put my hands on the floor. It was 1,000 miles of ice. I pushed myself off the couch, my body screaming, every joint a spike of pain. I was dizzy. The room tilted. I fell against the wall, using it to hold myself up. Sadie was whining, a high, thin sound. I half crawled, half fell toward the door. I reached the entryway, my breath catching in my throat. My hand, shaking so hard it looked like a stranger's, fumbled for the deadbolt. The metal was so cold it burned my fingers. It wouldn't budge, frozen. I used my other hand, putting my whole pathetic weight into it. With a loud, cracking snap, the bolt gave way. I fumbled for the knob, turned it, and the door scraped open, pulled from my weak grip by the wind, slamming back against the porch wall. I squinted into the gray, swirling daylight. It wasn't a wolf. It was Marcus Thorne. He stood there on my porch, a mountain of canvas and frost, his face caked in ice, his breath a thick cloud. He looked haggard, exhausted. He was holding the biggest armload of firewood I had ever seen. I just stared. I couldn't form a word. I must have been a hell of a sight, slumped in the doorway, half dead in my long underwear. He didn't speak. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with his tired, hard eyes, shouldered his way past me, and strode into my living room. I was too weak to stop him. Too stunned to try. He dumped the armload of split pine and oak by the wood stove. The noise, after days of silence, was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It echoed in the cold room like thunder. He didn't stop. He turned, brushed past me again, went back out to his truck, and returned with another armload. And another. He worked with a grim, silent efficiency until a massive pile of wood, enough for a week, stood by the cold stove. I had managed to pull myself up, my back against the wall, and I just watched him. He knelt by the stove, his thick, gloved fingers stuffing kindling and paper into the grate. He pulled a lighter from his pocket and sparked it. A small, hungry flame caught the paper. "Marcus," I finally managed, my voice a broken croak. He didn't look at me. He just fed a few larger pieces of kindling into the growing flame. "You were dying, Arthur?" He grunted, his voice rough. "But why?" He stopped. He sat back on his heels and stared into the fire. He was quiet for a long time. "That damn white wolf," he finally said, his voice low. My heart clenched. "What about him?" "He's been on your ridge," Marcus said, still looking at the fire. "All week. I'd see him when I was checking my fences, just sitting up there, watching your chimney." He fed another log into the stove. The flames licked at it, and the first wave of real warmth began to push back the cold. I thought he was coming for my cattle again. I had my rifle ready. But he just sat there. Then this morning, the smoke stopped. He finally turned, looking at me, his face a mask of grudging confusion. He went crazy, howling, pacing, running back and forth on the ridge. It was spooking my whole herd. I figured I'd finally come over and shoot the son of a bitch just to shut him up. "So what happened?" I whispered. I grabbed my rifle. I got in my truck. When I got to my main gate, there was a deer, a fresh kill, a big doe, dragged right across the road, blocking my way. He shook his head, as if trying to clear it. He was paying me. That's what it felt like. Paying me to come check on you. He was howling at my truck till I turned left instead of right. He looked at me, a deep, strange light in his eyes. "I don't know what kind of voodoo you and that dog of yours did on that mountain, Arthur, but I owed him." He paused. He saved my life last spring. A grizzly. Came out of the aspens. That wolf, he came out of nowhere. Fought it. Gave me time to get my gun. I never told anyone. He stood up, brushing the bark off his pants. The stove was roaring now, a beautiful, crackling sound. The room was already 5 degrees warmer. We just sat there, the two of us. Two old, broken-down enemies, sharing the warmth. Sadie, who had been watching all of this from her bed, let out a single, soft whine. Marcus looked at her. His hard face softened, just a fraction. "She's not gonna make it much longer, is she?" I swallowed, the warmth from the fire making my throat ache. "No, I don't think so." "Figured," he grunted. He turned and went back out to his truck one last time. I heard the cab door open and close. He came back in, holding something small and wiggling inside his coat. He walked over to Sadie's bed and knelt. "You did your job, old girl," he said softly. He pulled from his coat a tiny, trembling blue merle puppy, an Australian shepherd with one blue eye and one brown. "My bitch had a litter last month," Marcus said, not looking at me. "I was going to keep him. But you shouldn't be alone out here, Arthur. I guess that wolf taught me that much anyway. Nobody should be alone out here." He set the little pup on the rug. It stumbled, yipped, and then, smelling the other dog, it waddled over to Sadie. Sadie, who I thought didn't have the strength to lift her head, did. She sniffed the puppy, from its nose to its tail. The pup, in turn, licked her gray muzzle. And then, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Sadie's tail gave a single, weak thump against the floor. She gave the pup one last, long lick, a passing of the torch. Then she laid her head down on her paws, her eyes on the fire, and let out a long, contented sigh. Marcus had gone to the kitchen. I heard him running the water, making coffee. He came back with 2 mugs, the steam rising from them. He handed one to me. His hand was rough, calloused, but steady. "He's still out there," Marcus said, nodding toward the window. I looked out. I couldn't see him, but I knew. The ridge was dark, but it wasn't empty. "Yeah," I said, my voice thick. "I know, he's watching." The house was warm. The silence was broken by the crackle of the fire and the soft yipping of a new life. The wolf had taken my cat, and he had taken my dog. But he'd given me back my neighbor. And in a Wyoming winter, I realized that was more than a miracle. That was survival. Before you go, I have a simple request. This story, at its heart, was about Sadie, about that incredible loyalty only an animal can give. If you've ever had a special animal in your life, a dog, a cat, or any creature that left a mark on your soul, I would be honored if you just write their name in the comments below. I'd love to read them. I'll be reading everyone. And if you'd like to sit by the fire with me again for more stories like this, tales of survival, redemption, and the wild hearts that save us, please consider clicking that subscribe button. There's always another story waiting out here in the quiet, and we'd be honored to share it with you.